What we're doing now is zooming out a little bit from the sort of like the next of a black sky satellite and 50-centimeter resolution to looking at the whole history of overhead intelligence, and that's going to trying to draw the arc of history to where it's going. So Will, please show us your slides.
Exactly. Thank you, Oliver. And hill, if you climbed up and took a look. Starting in 600 BC, we began making maps. This is a map from 1589 by Cornelius de Jode, a renowned Belgian cartographer. At this point in time, you can see the best cartographer in the world had a pretty good understanding of the shape of Europe and Africa, North America, Asia, not so much. The first decisive use of a balloon for aerial reconnaissance was performed by the French at the Battle of Fleurus in 1794. The Belgian innovators. We need to come back to that. So what's important about the balloon was simply the premise that if you could see what was happening from above, you could have more accurate intelligence about the American Civil War. The Union Army employed tethered balloons, which would carry a telegraph operator and 4 men above the battlefield for reconnaissance. 40 years later, with the Spanish-American War, Corporal William Eadie, pictured in the center, took surveillance photos from a kite, which ended up playing an important role in the American victory. Finally, in World War I, cameras were mounted on aircraft on both sides. The Germans also took advantage of a novel opportunity involving carrier pigeons. We don't know what to say about their success. By World War II, we entered the era of modern overhead reconnaissance. Some planes would carry portable darkrooms on board so that photos could be developed for insights in real time. Here we're looking at overhead photos taken on D-Day. You can see the landing craft on one of the Normandy beaches. When the war ended and the Iron Curtain fell across Eastern Europe, the West lost visibility into Soviet-controlled territory for almost a decade. The US government's answer came, and therefore out of the reach of Soviet high-altitude air defense systems. The Soviets had a massive numerical advantage over the US in jet-powered strategic bombers that could deliver nuclear weapons. Ultimately, the U-2's 24 flights established the ground truth that the bomber gap did not exist. Given the highly classified nature of the program, though, this wasn't known by the general public. Then came the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. American Ambassador Adelaide Stevenson took these aerial reconnaissance photos to the floor of the United Nations, publicly establishing the ground truth of the Soviet activities in Cuba. As a direct result of the successful launch of the Sputnik 1 satellite by the Soviets in 1957, President Eisenhower authorized the Corona program under the guise of a space exploration program called Discoverer. The goal was to put satellites into orbit that would photograph Soviet territory and reduce the need for risky U-2 flights. What you're looking at here are Corona systems in final stages of assembly. Each successive Corona satellite carried increasingly more sophisticated cameras and technology, but recovering the film in an era before digital imaging and wireless data was particularly challenging. The Coronas were designed with 2 re-entry capsules of film. Upon hitting 60,000 feet, the parachutes would open, and at 15,000 feet, a US aircraft would fly by and use a net to grab the capsules right out of the sky. The first 13 missions failed due to a range of issues, including unsuccessful launches, camera malfunctions, missed recoveries. But in 1960, everything went right, and Discoverer 14 returned more photographic evidence of the Soviet Union in a single mission than every U-2 flight combined.
Isn't that the technique that Peter Beck was going to use? Just picking the things up.
That's right. Well, you know, if you think about the recent achievements with Starship, grabbing things out of the sky remains a great skill for cutting-edge thing. So this is an image of a Russian runway taken on that very first successful Corona mission in 1960, a landmark image in terms of the progress of technology for overhead reconnaissance. Many of the Corona missions, of course, had their challenges. In one particularly notable incident, a film bucket inadvertently landed in Venezuela, where it was discovered by local farmers. The United States government ended up having to purchase the spacecraft back from the Venezuelan government. And as a result of the incident, future Corona vehicles no longer said secret on them. Instead, the capsules included a reward for returning the equipment in 8 different languages. The imagery acquired from the cameras and satellites in the Corona program had a specific security system called Keyhole. As a result, the first 4 versions of Corona were labeled KH-1 through KH-4. In post-Corona, successive programs took up the KH designation. For example, KH-9, codenamed Hexagon, imaged 877 million square miles from 1971 to 1986 across 19 missions. What you're seeing here is a hexagon image of Kubinka Airfield near Moscow, April 1979. The 1976 launch of the KH-11 series, nicknamed Kennen and later Crystal, represented a watershed moment as film images were replaced by digital ones, eliminating the need for the mid-air capsule grabs. The capabilities of the KH-11 series are highly classified, but NASA has publicly acknowledged taking advantage of the technology in the development of the Hubble Space Telescope.
Was that KH-11?
I believe that, no, that's not a KH-11. That's taking you back to KH-9. So very little KH-11 imagery has ever entered the public domain. This is a Kiev-class aircraft carrier under construction from 1984. And this is a famous photo tweeted by President Donald Trump of a failed Iranian rocket launch. Many experts believe this is a KH-11 produced image, although that's never been publicly acknowledged.
Are you one of those experts?
No, I'm not. The first high-resolution commercial imaging satellite, IKONOS, was launched in 1998. We're looking at some IKONOS images here. The number of commercial imaging satellites and total imaging satellites has grown dramatically. As of 2008, there were just 150 in orbit. 15 years later, 2003, there are 1,264. For years, the US was the only nation with U-2s, and our allies benefited. We would share the imagery with our Western partners. Later, as reconnaissance evolved to include satellites, Western powers maintained a lead, but these things cost billions of dollars to put in space. And for a long time, only the superpowers could really bear the cost. But in the last 10 years, affordable access to launch and proliferated constellations have vastly improved access to these capabilities. And so companies like Black Sky, Planet, Ursa, and ISI are transforming access to geospatial intelligence. Here you can see an artist's rendering of the 50-kilogram Black Sky Gen 2 satellites. Now, more satellites means more frequent access to imagery, and we're moving, I think, towards an era of near real-time understanding of ground truth that, frankly, is going to be available to almost anyone. At the same time, camera technology has advanced dramatically. The first generation of Corona satellites only had the resolution to photograph objects 40 feet in diameter. Here we're looking at one of those, that same image from the Corona mission in 1960. And on the right is a photo taken by a Black Sky Gen 2 of a Chinese airbase near the borders of India and Bhutan in 2024. But what's more important today than imagery resolution is frequency of revisit and the application of AI to generate automated insights and alerts. This is what Lynn was alluding to earlier. Here we see a routine site monitoring program of that same airbase, tracking the activity pattern of Chinese stealth fighters. So the imagery is the source data here, but ultimately it's the change detection that matters to decision makers. The commercial Earth observation constellations are developing a base layer of near real-time ground truth, and that will be enhanced and accelerated through interoperability partnerships in the years ahead. I want to pause on that idea for a second, because just like what we've seen in the history of other network architectures, we're moving into the interoperability era among assets that have historically been really vertically integrated. The result is going to be globally accessible views of major events as they happen. For example, this Black Sky image shows 2 Chinese aircraft carriers at the same pier in the South China Sea in October 2024. This is the first time the ships were ever spotted moored together. The modern accessibility of this technology has the potential to enable a globally shared understanding of ground truth that is not classified, not restricted to superpowers, and is instead largely open source. So this is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's a really important point of geopolitical tension between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan. Ethiopia controls the ability to close the gates of the dam and thereby hold back water from the Nile's main tributaries, threatening the downstream drinking water supply and irrigation for farms in Egypt and Sudan. In order to establish the ground truth about the level of water in the reservoir, Egypt and Ethiopia have been aided by URSA Space Systems, which has used radar satellite imagery to independently monitor the level of water in the reservoir. This is security monitoring. This is ground truth being provided not by a global institution, not by a major watchdog, but simply by a commercial space company in Ithaca, New York. So now we've gone from ground truth derived from what we can see with our eyes. Here we're looking at the halls of Nova Business School, to aerial ground truth, to computer vision enabled satellite ground truth. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Will. That's fascinating. I've always found the Corona program.
Well, you know the history of this stuff better than almost anyone.
And there's a very good book by John Logsdon and Dwayne Day, if any of you are looking for it. But I was struck by one thing, maybe two things out of your presentation. One is the ground truth requires that you know what you're looking for. There's a haunting story of a 1944 aerial reconnaissance mission that took quite detailed pictures of Auschwitz, and no one knew what that could be. And the other one is that the burden of interpretation does carry a lot of political importance. I mean, you showed us Stevenson talking to the Security Council, but not Colin Powell talking to the Security Council. So how do you make sure the actual ground truth is what you see on the ground? So you still need to be able to know, to have some sense that what you're seeing is not a fake, that it's real. How do you deal with that when you are basically 500 kilometers up?
A lot of really important embedded questions in what you just said, Oliver. So number one, I think you've got, we can think about this in terms of successive layers of facts and abstraction, right? So the global commercial satellite infrastructure combined with national technical means continues to build this richer and richer data set of facts on the ground. On top of that, we are building layers of abstraction, AI-powered layers of abstraction. And so we know some of what we're looking for, right? To your point about the famous overhead reconnaissance imagery of Auschwitz, they didn't know what they were looking for, right? And so where does the human enter the loop? This is the fundamental question of the AI era, which is as an expert system sits alongside us and detects things that we know we're looking for, are we doing the thinking? And I think you're never going to remove the human authority element of that. Secondly, I think the ability to audit all the way down to ground truth is going to become really fundamentally important, and to actually verify the authenticity of the imagery that was generated. One of the most important conversations I ever had with a major leader in the US intelligence community focused on this. How do we know that this picture was in fact taken at this time, that it was taken by this asset, and that it is 100% of a verifiable real picture? I think we're moving towards an era of needing pixel level integrity from a security standpoint in imaging.
But is that actually hard to bring around at the same time as the AI use?
It's not. It's not hard because we are rapidly moving so much new capability into space, and we can build modern, even frankly, hardware-based architectures to provide that level of authenticity.
So an interesting question from Slido, which is very nicely doing my job for me, is about Starshield. You gave a very high number for Earth Orbit satellites. Does that include the Starshield? What can you tell us about the Starshield capacity?
I have no direct ability to comment on Starshield in terms of numbers or assets, but Starshield does represent a significant part of the evolving
But is
picture
it
here.
part of that 1,000?
It's not part of that
Oh, right.
1,000.
Right. Okay.
I do think as we consider sensors, networks, and data collection, it's impossible not to be talking about the role of SpaceX in terms of data gathering and the movement of information back from space. And here's where commercial is perhaps having its highest impact in terms of aiding national intelligence missions.
So last question for me, kind of as a journalist. When I first wrote about this around the time of the Iconos launch, I was very taken by the view that civil society, the global public commons, would be able to see and react to major things in real time. You know, sort of like we'd have been able to see Chernobyl if we'd had this. And now we live in a time when we can see right into the hearts of wars, of occupations, and it doesn't seem to actually change what global civil society does. It seems to me that this is still something not that's controlled by states, not so much because they are states, but because they understand how to do this sort of thing, and we as journalists, we as citizens just don't have that yet.
Oliver, I share your thought process there. I've been fascinated by the power of these capabilities, and as I look at where we're going with this, I draw an analog to location-based technologies generally. Location-based technologies were with us for decades before we built enough abstraction layers to make them really easy to use and really accessible. You don't get Uber, which is really just built on GPS, until you've built enough layers on top of it to make it broadly usable. And so
Google Maps, 20 years old next February.
Yeah, right. So we're getting to the point where the abstraction layers are more and more available to a broader swath of the population. That Chinese aircraft carrier photo to me is very telling, because I think when we face let's say a naval conflict in the South China Sea, I think we will have global eyes on it, on the pace of its development in a way we never have before. And those eyes will not simply be those of the major superpowers. They will be in part in the hands of media organizations like The Economist, and they will be in part in the hands of members of the general public.
It will be very interesting to see how something like that should play out then. Will, thanks very much. It's been a fascinating overview of overviews. And thank you very much for your time.